Hey everyone, welcome to the Scottish Summit 2021. I hope you're all enjoying the event so far, and I want to thank you for choosing to attend my session on how starting a podcast got me through a pandemic. I maybe should have updated the title to How Starting a Podcast is Getting Me Through a Pandemic, since we are unfortunately still in the midst of it. However, I am grateful for today and the fact that we can come together virtually and learn from each other. Before we get started, it's important to take a minute to recognise and thank our sponsors. So a big thank you to ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Proximo, Redspire, Agilicis, and Hitachi Solutions. So thanks again for choosing to spend your time with me for this session on a Saturday. It's a shame we can't all get together in person, but it means that we can open up the event to so much more people. And I'm really thankful to be doing my first talk of the year and the first talk in a while at the Scottish Summit, being from Scotland. So before we get into it, I will introduce myself quickly. My name is Lisa Clark and I'm based in Dundee, Scotland, and I've been in the IT industry for 10 years now. Which feels pretty crazy to say, but it is true. I'm part of Dell Technologies, focused on our Microsoft hybrid cloud portfolio, the Azure Stack portfolio. I'm super passionate about hybrid cloud and enabling customers to harness the power of hybrid. When lockdown hit in March of 2020 last year, I decided to throw my time and energy behind something I'd been thinking about for a long time, but I had never really got round to for numerous reasons, which we'll come on to. And so I started a podcast. I'm going to share with you how I got started and what I have learnt, and ultimately how it has really helped me through the last year. Last year, I was super fortunate to be awarded the Microsoft Community Hero and Inclusive Leader badges, which was extremely special to me, and I'm repping them today with my t-shirt. As far as I'm concerned, the Microsoft community rocks, and I'm sure you already know that, and I'm very thankful to be part of it. Okay, so let's take a look at the agenda. Firstly, I'll talk about why I decided to start a podcast. Then I'll cover how I got started from a practical sense, the equipment programs I used. And then we'll get into how I started, but from a personal perspective, and how I overcame two of the biggest barriers to getting started that I believe we all suffer from, which is finding motivation and imposter syndrome. Finally, we'll take a look at what I learned from my guests and how stepping out of my comfort zone helped me find my place in the tech community as a non-techie, and it helped me stay connected and sane throughout the last year. Please remember to use the hashtag Scottish Summit 2021 throughout to let us know that you're with us and share your thoughts throughout this session. I'd love to read your tweets afterwards with any questions or comments that you've got. So please do use the hashtag Scottish Summit 2021. So why did I start a podcast? Well, at the start of 2020, I decided that I wanted to get more involved within the Microsoft community. I had dipped in and out over the years and always found it such a great vibe, such a great community to be part of. I'd recently started my position at Dell, which was the perfect opportunity to get stuck back in. I really wanted to have a go at creating content. I thought it would be a good idea to try my hand at a few different things, so blogging, podcast, maybe video content. And a couple of months went by and I never really got around to it. And I'm sure a lot of you know that feeling. There's a list of things you'd like to have a go at, but you don't have the time, you don't know whether you'd be good at it, and you don't know just how to get started. I also suffered from severe imposter syndrome as a non-techie. I wondered what I had to what I had to contribute was of value. Then COVID-19 hit and we were in lockdown, and I thought, if I don't start this now, when will I start? So I decided to give podcasting and blogging a go. Now, when you look for advice on starting a blog or a podcast, you'll likely come across a lot of advice which will tell you to find a niche and focus on that. To be honest, that advice is part of the reason I hadn't really started blogging before. I gave it a go once. I wrote about fitness and life topics, but didn't really keep it up. I'm not a niche kind of person. I like to discuss and explore a variety of topics. So I decided to ignore this advice which is something I regularly do. And if I'm honest, I'd encourage you to do the same, especially if it's a barrier to getting started. If you can't find a niche or you're worried about picking one and sticking with it, skip that for now. It's also important to remember that as a human being, you're not a niche, right? You're unique and you're varied. So be you. This is a problem I see happening on Twitter a lot. People following people for one aspect of them, so for their technical content. But you have to remember it's not about the number of followers, it's about the quality of your engagement. You want people to follow and engage with you, just not just your content. Well, at least that's what I would like. So we'll come on to this later, but to get started, you really want to make it as easy as possible for yourself. So I decided I would start out, try my hand at blogging and podcasting, see if I would come across perhaps a focus area, maybe a niche in the process. And this is known as the explore and exploit method. So first you explore various topics or ideas that you might want to take forward in the future. And then in the process, what'll happen is you'll find something that you really enjoy or that works for you or that is successful. Then you exploit that. So when you're starting off, don't niche down, explore, and then pick a few avenues to exploit. So I started blogging and podcasting, and I definitely found that I enjoyed the podcasting more. So I focused on that over the last year. And I found that whilst podcasting, a theme developed. I began to enjoy, as in my guests and listeners, sharing stories of how people got into tech. So what we would do is we discuss career development, how they got into tech, and then what we do is we pick like a hot tech topic and talk at it at a level that was probably applicable for techies and non-techies. And this format started to evolve by doing. So the key is to start and then learn and improve as you go. Okay, so let's get stuck into the practicalities. Like the extract for this session describes, I'm not going to cover the best equipment, the best software, how to get the most followers. There's a ton of content out there which covers that. I mean, 2 tips I would give you is be consistent and be authentic, but you'll hear that everywhere. That said, I'm going to cover what I use to get started because it turns out that it's really easy and it's not that hard. And the key to getting started is to make it easy. So I mentioned before, a ton of content out there on how to get started, right? The information overload is actually one of them. Again, another reason why I didn't start a podcast sooner. There's so much information on how to get the perfect audio and how to soundproof and how to edit, information on the perfect mic setup and so much more. It is a rabbit hole. And if you want to get started, you need to step away from it. So you need to step away from that rabbit hole, especially if you're like me, you're not technical. It can really put you off. Thankfully, I have an awesome friend called Emma Story Gordon, who's a very successful online personal trainer, and she has her own podcast. She has a few actually. You can check her out at ESG Fitness on Instagram. And Emma introduced me to a program called Anchor, and that is how I got started. So, and I will hammer this home, the hardest part is really starting. Your mind will find so many excuses to prevent you from just starting. So I started with Zoom, Anchor, and my Jabra conference speaker. I think we all know Zoom and the Jabra conference speaker that I started with. It's pretty basic. Anchor's tagline is the easiest way to make a podcast, and it really is. I set up an account on Anchor. I used Zoom to record my podcast with my guest. I uploaded the MP3 file and used Anchor's built-in editing tool to do some basic editing, like snipping the start and the end, and I added some sound effects, and then I published. Anchor automatically publishes your podcast to iTunes, Spotify, Google, etc. It sets you all up on all the platforms. I think I'm on 8+ platforms. There are ones that I haven't even heard of. And actually, I just checked back in on Anchor recently, and they've made upgrades to their editing capabilities within the program, and they've really improved those. And I used another free program called Canva to create my first ever Lisa at the Edge logo, which I actually was supposed to put on this slide, but I forgot. And I wanted to share this because I want everyone to know how easy it is to start something like this. Even if it's not a podcast that you want to start, like, trust me, whatever it is, it's probably far easier than you think. And I created my first 20 episodes with this setup. So, it works. Um, After my first 20 episodes, I took a bit of a break. If I'm honest, I threw myself into overworking, starting the podcast to distract me from the pandemic, and I probably burnt myself out a little bit. So I took a break, and during this break, I decided to invest in some upgrades. I wasn't spending money on holidays, etc. last year, so I decided to invest in Lisa at the Edge. So I got myself a new mic, the Blue Yeti mic. They were sold out everywhere for a while, as everyone was a little podcast crazy last year. I also invested in a graphics package, including a new logo, which is the one you'll see on this slide deck, an intro and an outro video for my YouTube channel, presentation and speaker plates so that I could start to publish my podcasts in video format on YouTube as well. I got my graphics package and speaker plates, etc., intro video, outro video, everything from Chris at Ratworks. He's amazing. I knew nothing about what I was looking for, and he helped me every step of the way. He also showed me how to use a free tool called DaVinci Resolve to create a template for editing and publishing my videos to YouTube. Unfortunately, my laptop is not up to spec and can't handle the editing and rendering of my 60-minute long podcasts. So he also currently helps me out with my editing until I get my own machine, because I use my work one just now. So I still use Zoom to record my podcasts. I have been looking into a few different programs, but I'm undecided whether to switch yet. But the key takeaway from this section is that you don't need the perfect setup to start. Again, getting started is the key. You can learn and improve as you progress. Everyone has to start somewhere. Take a look at your favorite YouTuber or blogger's earliest content. Scroll right back and see how they started. Do not compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. So yeah, key takeaway, it's probably easier than you think. You can make it easy, just get started, learn and improve as you go. Okay, so getting started practically was probably easier than getting started mentally. The two biggest barriers from my perspective were waiting for motivation to arrive and the infamous imposter syndrome. I'm going to share a few things which I discovered, which really helped me overcome both of these barriers. With motivation, we actually have it backwards. And with imposter syndrome, well, we need to realize that we're human. And this is just another way of our clever, but sometimes silly brain trying to keep us safe. So motivation is a funny thing. We often wait for motivation to start something. The problem is we can wait for a very, very long time, and sometimes it might not even appear. I'm sure you can all relate. What I've discovered is that action isn't just the effect of motivation, but it's actually the cause. Action is the impetus for motivation. It is the precursor to motivation. We rarely ever feel completely ready to start. I'm sure you guys can relate to that. Waiting to feel ready, waiting for motivation to appear will have us waiting some more rather than doing. So we need to swap I need to get motivated to take action to I need to take action to get motivated. And trust me when I say that action equals motivation. Think about it. When have you really lacked motivation? Even just to get the housework done, for instance, when you manage to pull yourself off the sofa and do the dishes, you don't usually just stop there. Usually, you get the motivation to then go and do the hoovering or do some cleaning. So yeah, it's really interesting actually. Thinking big is brilliant. Okay, thinking big is great, but it can be intimidating. Big thinking is great for setting goals and direction, but not necessarily for getting stuff done. So the key is to break it down and start really, really small. The next thing to do is to make it easy. Make it as easy as you can to start. I've hammered that home. The key is to get the ball rolling, and like a snowball, it will build up momentum. So I'd like everyone to take a minute right now. If you've got pen and paper or notes on your phone, take a minute now to think about a goal or an idea that you have, but that you found difficult to get started. Something you just can't seem to find the motivation for. So take a little moment to think about that. Once you have that in your head, now think of the very first action that you need to get started. So think of that very first action. The first thing that you think of will probably be either not the first thing or larger than it needs to be. So break that down and think about what really is the very first small, tiny step that you need to take. And make a note of that. Okay, so now I want you to commit to completing that step within the next 24 hours from now. Okay? I want you to note that down, commit here to yourself and to me that you're going to complete that within the next 24 hours, and then let me know. So tag me on Twitter, at least at the edge, and hashtag Scottish Summit 2021, and let me know that you've taken the first action. And then let me know how you feel. Did you take one action? Did you then take two? How did that go for you? And then from there, take it to the next and the next, one step at a time. You want to create this continuous loop of taking action, it producing motivation to take more action. Big thinking's great. You know, have a moment where you set the big goal, you set the direction, put it away, and then just focus on that first step. So hopefully I'll see some tweets from you guys. Okay, let's go to the second biggest barrier, imposter syndrome. It's something we all suffer from, and it turns out it's the inverse of a cognitive bias known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. So understanding more about this really helped me not maybe overcome imposter syndrome, but to deal with it. It's still there. It's still there. I probably procrastinated far too much on actually writing this, my first talk, and delivering my first talk of 2021, but also the first talk I've done in a while. So you know, it's not gone forever. But we have to accept that we're humans, and we've got really clever brains, but they have limitations, and the awareness of that is key to working your way through them. So what is a cognitive bias? A cognitive bias is a type of systematic error in thinking, which occurs when people are processing and interpreting information in the world around us, and it affects the decisions and the judgments that we make. Cognitive bias is often a result of your brain trying to simplify information processing. If you think about it, especially in these days, we're taking in all kinds of information all the time, from our immediate environment, from our phones, our computers, the feelings that we get off dealing with other people. It's a lot. So our brain, tries to be clever and simplify that for us. So biases work like a rule of thumb, and they help you make sense of the world around you. Now, this is a powerful thing, but it can have its limitations. And like I say, a cognitive bias is a systematic error. So there is a cognitive bias called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which people assess their cognitive ability as greater than it is. So it's overconfidence gone wrong. And that's an odd concept, right? Because we tend to praise confidence and we praise self-assurance. But inflated self-belief can snowball into ignorance and arrogance. And I'm sure we've all been there, and I'm sure we've all experienced that. Well, it turns out that imposter syndrome is just the inverse of this effect. So where competent and actually highly skilled individuals do not see themselves as such. So have you ever felt undeserving of your achievements? Have you felt like your success was down to luck, or you've been worried that you might be discovered as a fraud? Then you've likely experienced imposter syndrome. I would say I definitely struggle with the whole undeserving of my achievements, being discovered as a fraud. The problem with imposter syndrome is when self-criticism, which can be useful at times, right? Just like, self-assurance can be, but again, it snowballs into a debilitating imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is defined as a chronic feeling of fraudulence, self-doubt, and inadequacy. That was a tongue twister. It's really important to recognize this. You're not broken, you're human. And your brain is, what it's trying to do is trying to keep you safe. It's perceiving danger where there really is none. It's from their caveman days about fight and flight, and it thinks that, embarrassment or failure or etc. It's equating them as the same, and they're not. And I think being aware of this can be really helpful in combating imposter syndrome. So in my research about imposter syndrome, I came across the 5 R's in overcoming it. So these are recognize, rationalize, reframe, ready, and repeat. So recognizing is what we just spoke about, right? It's being aware of imposter syndrome, and that even just being aware of it can help you overcome it. It's easier said than done, but when you're feeling an overwhelm of self-doubt or fraudulence, take a step back and try and ask, what is causing the feeling? Identify that it's imposter syndrome. Next step, rationalizing. Take a moment to acknowledge your achievements, which led you to where you are right now. Try and replace the negative thoughts of fraudulence or luck with rationalizing what actually caused your promotion or your achievement or whatever you're experiencing right now. What are the facts of what actually happened? What did you do? What happened, to lead you to where you are now? Next step, reframe. This stage is all about altering your perception of the situation. Try and catch any thoughts which seem to be all or nothing, so disastrous, one extreme to the other. For instance, thinking that you're either a total success or a total failure, when there's, a large spectrum in between there, right? Try and retrain this thinking into something more in the middle. So recognize wins and areas of improvements. Try to come away from either of those extremes, come into the middle, recognize both wins and achievements and areas of improvement. The next step is readying yourself. This might be the toughest stage. This is where you ready yourself to let go of the thoughts of self-doubt and fraudulence. You look back on your recognizing, your rationalizing, and your reframing, and you let go of the negative thoughts of self-doubt and fraudulence. Write them down, throw them in the bin, do anything that helps you have a feeling of just letting them go. Another useful tip is actually when those negative thoughts come into your brain is noting them and labeling them. So note that a negative thought has come in and then label it as not useful. Your brain is just trying to help you, but it's a little bit out of date for our environment. So when those come in, just note that's not useful and retrain your brain. And then the last stage is repeat. So I'm sure we're all aware, as I've said, imposter syndrome is something which never goes away completely. And it pops up every now and again, usually in the most unhelpful situations. So write down these 5 R's, keep a journal of the times that you feel like this and work through the R's and how you got through it. Another useful tool would be to keep a journal of your achievements so you can look back on them. Professional, personal, small, large. Keep a list of your achievements. So every now and again, you can look back and you can, take a little moment and say, oh yeah, I've done all that, been through all this. And try and preempt future imposter syndrome episodes. So again, like if you're delivering a talk or you're doing something, do a little bit of prep work using the 5 R's to process and work through your feelings. So the Dunning-Kruger effect and imposter syndrome are opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're very similar. The Dunning-Kruger effect is where self-assurance and confidence snowballs into ignorance and arrogance, and imposter syndrome is where self-criticism snowballs into debilitating imposter syndrome. Having the self-awareness to recognize when you might be at either end is the most important step in overcoming either of these cognitive biases. Self-awareness, very key. Okay, so what have I learned from my guests? So far I have released 27 episodes. 10 of these are in video format on YouTube. And I've had the pleasure of hosting 28 awesome human beings on my show. I have learned so much from my lengthy discussions with my guests. And they are lengthy. Again, it's just me and doing what I enjoy. 60-minute, hour-long episodes is just what I enjoy. There are podcasts out there that are half an hour, 20 minutes. You've got different people enjoying different lengths of podcasts. So again, don't be beholden to a time frame that you must keep to. I like to keep the conversations as authentic as possible. And because of this, my guests have shared some amazing stories and advice. And I've actually created some hopefully lifelong friends and really great connections. Um, we've covered such a range of topics, technical and non-technical. We've talked about career development, different routes people take to get into tech, which I think is super important to share, that there's not just one route into tech, and actually sharing this information encourages different types of people to join this industry. We, of course, covered the pandemic, and we shared our thoughts and feelings on lockdown and how we were coping. Community events turning virtual. How did we feel about that? We shared our thoughts on diversity in tech. Making the move from IT ops to DevOps is something I spoke with a few people about. I had experts on to discuss my favorite topic, which is Azure Stack, and also why we need non-techies in tech, and so much more. It was extremely hard to narrow it down to 5 important learnings from my journey so far. However, what I'm thinking is I can add to these each time I do this talk. So let's just go with 5 that came to mind. So in my episode with the awesome Holly Lehman, we discussed how you shouldn't fear hearing the word no. No is never the end. It just means you need to go in a different direction. And if you don't ask, you don't know. So don't fear hearing no. It just means that route isn't open. Go find another route. When I had Sarah Lean join me, aka at Techie Last, we discussed whether the pandemic should be seen as a productivity contest. It was quite early on in the lockdown, and we both said it shouldn't. You don't need to learn a new language or solve world problems whilst we're in lockdown. You need to take care of yourself, and so that you can take care of those around you. I mean, I may have threw myself into the podcast, and I'm thankful for that, but I maybe used that as a way to get myself through the pandemic and kind of avoid it. And that's not great. So you should really look after yourself. There is no one way for all of us to get through this. You've got to think about what you need. When I met with the community queen, Isadora Katanik, we discussed very honestly our feelings about not being able to meet our community friends and connect at events. Izzy shared the importance of community with me and inspired me to keep going with my podcast. If you don't already know, Izzy and Holly have come together and they've created their series called Head in the Cloud, Heart in the Community, which aims to share positive and uplifting stories from the community. And it has the most amazing guests and amazing advice. So you've got to check them out on YouTube. So search Head in the Cloud, Heart in the Community, and check that series out. It's brilliant. In one of my most recent episodes with Michael Levin, we have an open and honest conversation about mental health and how we've suffered from that and how 2020 affected us, but also how we got through it. And that was a really great conversation. We had a plan, a rough outline, and we went way off track, and we started talking about mental health, but I think it's a really great episode. In my episode with Steve Buchanan, we had a really honest discussion about diversity in tech. Steve actually flipped the tables on me and started asking me questions, and we found out that we'd actually had similar experiences, and we talked about how to be more diverse in tech and why representation matters. So yeah, I have learned so much from my guests, and I am so thankful for the last year and my guests for joining me, and also for my listeners. It's been such a brilliant experience. So stepping out of your comfort zone, scary, huh? If I hadn't stepped out of my comfort zone last April with my first podcast, I'm really not sure how the last year would have gone for me. First of all, I wouldn't be here delivering this talk and sharing my learnings to hopefully help or inspire someone else. I wouldn't have realised that I do in fact add value to the community as a non-techie. I wouldn't have met my amazing guests and created connections and friendships, which have resulted in actually follow-on virtual catch-ups, which have really kept me going. I wouldn't have been able to support others on getting started on creating content. So recently, some colleagues from Dell in Scotland reached out to ask for support on starting a podcast. They run the mental health ERG in Delft, Scotland, and they want to start a podcast and share stories there. So that was great to be able to help them. I can't believe people were reaching out to me to ask how to start a podcast. From a professional perspective, this has created loads of opportunities for me. I co-presented the launch of Azure Stack HCI with Microsoft on the Dell and Microsoft launch. Colleagues have really reached out to me to support them in customer discussions around Microsoft Hybrid Cloud. And my team and I put together the Azure Stack Christmas special and published that on my YouTube. So you can still check that out if you're feeling a little bit Christmassy still. It still amazes me to this day that by stepping out of my comfort zone, I'm able to help others. And that's what really keeps me going. This and that, I think I've really discovered a passion of mine. I absolutely love having deep conversations with people and sharing people's stories on how they got into tech. I love that. And this brings me to an important point. It's extremely easy to fall into the trap of comparing yourself to others out there. Other community rock stars, usually those who've been doing this for a long time or those that you look up to. Do not fall into that trap. Don't let comparison rob you of personal growth or indeed the community of the inspiration of viewing that personal growth. Representation is so important in encouraging the diversity that we need within tech. People need to see others that they relate to, do the things that they want to do to show them that it's possible. So stepping out of your comfort zone is scary, but I promise you that it's worth it. So I just want to say a massive thank you for coming to this talk. I actually really enjoyed the process of putting this together. I hope that you found something that you can take away from this and that helps you or inspires you to, in the words of Donna Sarkar, do the thing. Just get started, make it easy, learn as you go. And if you have any thoughts, questions, whatever, please tweet me at Lisa at the Edge and remember to use the hashtag Scottish Summit 2021. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.